I'm Scott Kalani, Director of Exhibitions and Public Programs. Thanks for joining us. Today's presentation is part of Architecture Month 2020, which is co-produced by the Washington Architectural Foundation and the Washington Chapter AIA. Special thanks to our premier partners for their support, DC Preservation League and National Trust for Historic Preservation. Thanks also, and more importantly this evening, to our programming partner, the National Mall Coalition, for organizing tonight's program, Resiliency for the National Mall. I'm delighted to welcome our presenters, Judy Scott Feldman, Ph.D., Chair of the National Mall Coalition, and Arthur Cotton Moore, FAIA, Vice Chair of the National Mall Coalition. If you have questions during the presentation, please use the chat feature at the bottom of the screen. Be sure to select all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your question. We'll hold Q&A at the end of the presentation. Before we begin, a note regarding your participation in this presentation. By participating in this webinar, you are granting your permission to be recorded and for the recording of you to be distributed as AIADC and the Washington Architectural Foundation may choose. Judy and Arthur, thanks for being with us.
Thanks very much to AIA for hosting this session tonight, and thanks to all of you who have joined us. We hope you find our presentation interesting and something to stimulate some thought. I'm going to start by giving an overview of the National Mall Underground project, and after that, Arthur Cotton Moore will go into greater detail about the design of the project. Well, Arthur just said, thanks for joining us, but he has his, he has his mute on. So we can go ahead and start. You're on the fourth slide, yes.
The National Mall, one of the country's most iconic landscapes, the stage for democracy, site of protests and gatherings of national significance, is threatened by devastating flooding such as happened in June 2006. As this reconstruction by architect Arthur Cotton Moore shows, floodwaters in 2006 inundated Constitution Avenue and mall area public buildings, including the National Archives, Smithsonian Museums, and more. We were reminded of the threat as recently as last July, when a month's worth of rain fell in less than an hour, wreaked havoc across the metro region, and overwhelmed storm sewers, flooding the National Archives and White House basement. Now 14 years after the 2006 flood, and a host of reports confirming the flood threat from government agencies including DC Water, National Park Service, and FEMA, there's still no decision about what to do. Recent efforts by an intergovernmental flood response team, the DC Silver Jackets, have failed to bring the relevant federal and DC entities to any agreement on a comprehensive solution. The biggest impediment, and pretty much everyone agrees on this, is the plethora of entities involved in mall governance. These include the Park Service, Smithsonian, National Gallery, plus DC and federal review agencies. No one entity has the jurisdiction or responsibility, or importantly, the funding, to tackle the flooding problem. Ultimately, solving the flood problem will require civic spirit, the theme of AIA's Architecture Month, to rise above jurisdiction-based planning to plan for the larger good, that is, our pride in American heritage that is embodied in the nation's capital and on the mall. The COVID-19 crisis reminds us of the dire consequences of no big picture leadership. Today, we want to show you a stormwater flooding solution we believe embodies civic spirit. The National Mall Coalition's National Mall Underground. The coalition has been developing the National Mall Underground since 2013 and refining the concept in dozens of meetings with DC and federal agencies and civic groups. Both the Army Corps of Engineers and the Silver Jackets have reviewed the concept. What is it? The underground is a multi-purpose stormwater reservoir, mall visitor center, tour bus parking, geothermal energy facility. The basic box, a large stormwater reservoir, can be constructed beneath the mall's grassy panels between the Smithsonian Castle and the Natural History Museum. As seen in this early concept drawing by Arthur Moore, the underground is capable of collecting 28 to 30 million gallons of floodwater. That is, the volume of a 200-year flood, such as that in 2006. In addition to floodwater storage, the multi-purpose facility can solve a host of long-standing mall needs. When not needed to collect stormwater, the lower floodable level will function as a parking garage for tour buses bringing tourists to the mall from around the country. The upper level, not to be flooded, will contain limited car and bus parking, plus rest facilities for bus drivers, and a mall welcome center with restrooms and food service. At one end, a smaller cistern can collect rainwater. At the other end, another cistern can hold groundwater pumped from beneath mall area buildings. This water will be used for irrigation of the mall grass, trees, and gardens. A field of geothermal wells beneath the structure, added to the concept in 2014 at the suggestion of then GSA Administrator Dan Tangerlini, will provide clean energy to Smithsonian museums and other nearby public buildings. There are various options for vehicle access. Cars can enter via the existing ramp from Independence Avenue to the 12th Street Tunnel. For buses, a ramp can be located between the Arts and Industries building and the Hirshhorn. Alternatively, access might be gained through the 9th Street Tunnel. Cost estimates for the underground range between $260 and $320 million. Arthur Moore can explain further. Creating a beneath-the-mall stormwater reservoir is not the Coalition's idea. The reservoir was one of 4 solutions found viable in the 2011 Federal Triangle Stormwater Drainage Study. That report, commissioned in response to the 2006 flooding, was a collaboration among 14 federal and district agencies and headed by DC Water and the National Capital Planning Commission. But the cost of the reservoir was deemed prohibitive. The Coalition's idea was to take the concept of an empty box beneath the mall that would sit unused most of the time and turn it into an active, visitor-friendly facility capable of generating revenue year-round. Intrigued by the innovative approach, the DC Council in 2017 passed a unanimous resolution requesting that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers study its feasibility. In September 2018, the Corps completed its report and found that flood risk from a storm of the intensity that flooded the Federal Triangle area in 2006 could be reduced significantly during a flood event by implementation of the underground. Also, revenue potential from parking fees and water credits may offer self-financing opportunities that attracts a public-private partnership. Also in September 2018, the Coalition was invited to present the underground concept to the Silver Jackets team representing DC and federal agencies and local universities. It's clear that there's interest in the concept among some mall stakeholders. However, the Park Service opposes it because it does not conform to its own 2010 National Mall Plan. This final 2019 Silver Jackets report confirms that stormwater flooding is an urgent threat. It also reports that agencies cannot agree on a solution and will continue to explore options, essentially kicking the can down the road. You may be wondering, is the National Mall Underground really necessary or realistic? I'd now like to anticipate some questions you may have. I'll talk about why the underground is both needed and realistic. Then Arthur Moore will explain the evolving design. You might be asking, aren't there other solutions that don't require digging up 3 blocks of the mall and disrupting pedestrian movement and public celebrations and demonstrations? And what about parking? Won't DC and federal agencies oppose it because it could increase traffic and congestion? Can it ever even happen if the Park Service opposes it? And who will pay for it? Without dedicated funds, it'll never happen. And Is flooding really that bad? Question 1. Aren't there alternatives that don't require digging up the mall? The Silver Jackets reported in its 2019 study that of a number of potential solutions to mall area flooding they examined, only 2 are viable. One viable solution is to build a new pumping station that would pump floodwaters into the tidal basin. In the coalition's view, a pumping station would have limited use. What if DC gets heavy rains that cause both stormwater flooding and Potomac River flooding? Where would the floodwater be pumped? The only remaining viable solution, according to DC Water, is stormwater storage under the mall. Yes, construction will cause inconvenience. It will close off a 3-block area of the mall between 9th and 12th Street for about 2 years. But you may recall that the Park Service's turf grass renewal project also closed off large swaths of the mall for 2 years, from 2014 to 2016, and visitors seemed to adapt in anticipation of the beautiful carpet of green. We believe visitors also will forgive the negative short-term effects once the benefits of the underground, including a new mall welcome center, transforms the visitor experience for the better. One additional benefit of building a multi-purpose reservoir that also includes a visitor center, as well as rainwater cisterns and parking and geothermal, is that this reduces the need for future construction projects to solve these needs. For example, the Smithsonian's proposed South Mall campus plan could be simplified because 2 of its components, a new visitor center and underground loading dock, can be accommodated in the underground. Question 2. Won't parking increase traffic and congestion? Tourist destinations around the world, including in the U.S. and at Washington's National Cathedral, use underground parking to address precisely that question. They remove cars and buses from the street while also supporting tourism and the economic benefits it provides. The underground will not open until 10 a.m. It will be only for mall visitors, not commuters who are the source of DC's traffic gridlock. Like the garage at the National Cathedral, the garage under Amsterdam's Museumplein Park includes parking for tour buses, glass pavilions here in Amsterdam, and here at Washington's National Cathedral provide examples of unobtrusive pedestrian access to the underground space. The truth is, DC and federal entities have for years been searching for ways to get buses off city streets. It's not just traffic congestion, it's also public health. The American Lung Association's latest State of the Air report gives DC an F for ozone, which is associated with high rates of childhood asthma. Buses inside the underground are removed from city streets, and their engines are turned off. Faced with the ever-growing bus parking problem, the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments in 2015 conducted a multi-jurisdictional regional study of bus parking. They concluded that the proposed National Mall Underground would be the most dramatic improvement in bus parking capacity if constructed. Question 3. Can it ever even happen if the Park Service opposes it? The mall belongs to the American people. The government agencies are stewards of the public trust. Congress has final say. Over the past 200 years, jurisdiction over parts of the mall has changed hands, from DC's original 3 commissioners to the Department of Interior to the Army Corps, Smithsonian, and so on. When a new Smithsonian museum is being constructed, Congress simply transfers land from the Park Service to the Smithsonian. Such a transfer of jurisdiction may be necessary for the mall underground. Question 4. Who will pay for it? Without dedicated funds, it'll never happen. We are well aware of Congress's lack of attention to major infrastructure projects, and that the COVID-19 crisis has depleted financial reserves and may further reduce any interest in projects like the National Mall Underground. However, from the beginning, we believe that revenue generated from the various components, from stormwater credits, clean energy credits, sale of irrigation water, and parking revenue, could stimulate creative financing opportunities, including philanthropic monies. So in 2018, the National Mall Coalition commissioned a financial consultant with strong experience with government projects to develop a financing plan. The preliminary financing plan states, for federal and DC stakeholders, the National Mall Underground can achieve a stormwater mitigation solution at significant cost savings in comparison to the other alternatives thus far identified. Of equal value to these federal stakeholders is that the financing plan is expected to make use of existing federal contracting authorization programs to pay for the project over time, avoiding the need for a substantial upfront appropriation. Question 5. Is flooding really that bad? Here, let me shift gears to provide a little historical context. Since our founding in 2000, the National Mall Coalition has attempted to contribute to mall projects by promoting comprehensive and civic-minded thinking, in the tradition of the visionary 1791 L'Enfant Plan and 1901 Macmillan Commission Plan, the blueprints for the mall. Both L'Enfant and Macmillan Commission conceived of the mall as a designed landscape and public space that embodies and promotes the spirit of American democracy. However, one of the unforeseen but disastrous legacies of the historic plans is flooding. L'Enfant situated the low-lying mall along two waterways, the Potomac River and Tiber Creek. By the time the 1901 Macmillan Commission came along, Tiber Creek had been paved over to create Constitution Avenue. The Commission chose the triangle of land between Pennsylvania Avenue and Constitution Avenue and Old Tiber Creek for the government buildings we know as the Federal Triangle. Also by then, the Army Corps of Engineers had created hundreds of acres of new land west and south of the Washington Monument with material dredged from the Potomac, thus moving the Potomac shoreline 1 mile further west. The Macmillan Plan used that land to expand the mall westward to a monument to Lincoln and southward to what became the Jefferson Memorial. In other words, a good half of the mall is located in what used to be Potomac River bottom. And the huge Federal Triangle complex sits over Old Tiber Creek. With the best of intentions, L'Enfant and Macmillan tamed nature, but now nature is roaring back, and it's been roaring back for over a century. The Great Flood of 1936 inundated the Navy Yard. See the Capitol in the background. East Potomac Park was underwater in 1985. You can just make out the Jefferson and Washington monuments in the background. Flooded walkways around the tidal basin are a regular occurrence. And the flood of 2006 devastated the Mall and Federal Triangle area. In fact, DC has 3 different types of flooding. To explain, I'll use slides from this helpful 2018 presentation by the National Capital Planning Commission. First, riverine flooding happens during and in the days following heavy rains as the Potomac River overflows its banks to lower ground, the mall and downtown. It happened in 1889 and in 1936, and is common at Washington Harbor in Georgetown. Second, coastal flooding, or tidal flooding, happens when tides and storm surges push the Potomac northward. The submerged walkways around the Jefferson Memorial are the result of tidal flooding. Third, interior flooding has nothing to do with the rivers. It happens when heavy rains flow from higher ground to lower and overwhelm the storm drains, inundating streets and buildings. This is what happened during the 2006 flood, which destroyed the National Archives' newly opened visitor center, forced closures of museums and government buildings, and caused tens of millions of dollars in damage. Since then, stopgap measures such as sandbags have been used to protect underground metro stations from being inundated. Some important steps are being taken to resolve DC's multiple flooding problems. DC Water's ongoing $2.6 billion Clean River project is constructing enormous tunnels to collect combined sewer overflow volume from city streets to prevent runoff into the Anacostia and Potomac rivers. The Anacostia River and Blue Plains tunnels are complete, and the Northeast Boundary Tunnel is in progress. The next phase is the Potomac River Tunnel, going from Rock Creek to Blue Plains Treatment Facility. The environmental review for this phase was just completed in March of this year. However, this ambitious DC project will not collect stormwater from the mall area. Another ongoing project is the Park Service's Potomac Park levee improvements. This is intended to address riverine flooding to prevent the Potomac River overflowing its banks and flowing down 17th Street into downtown. I show you here slides from a presentation by the Army Corps of Engineers and Park Service. The levee is a system of walls and embankments originally built in the 1930s and extending from the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument grounds. The sandbag barrier used since the 1930s to close off 17th Street during floods was replaced in 2014 by a removable post and panel closure. First, the posts go up, then the panels are put in place, a complicated and time-consuming procedure, but one that has proved successful. However, the 17th Street closure, like the Clean Rivers endeavor, does not address the stormwater flooding problem, nor do 3 additional flood projects now in development. The Park Service's new Save the Tidal Basin campaign is in the process of working with nonprofit partners to solicit private funding and expert advice on how to protect the tidal basin from tidal flooding. Second, the Justice Department, which suffered heavy flooding damage in the 2006 flood, has apparently given up on any comprehensive solution. They're going before NCPC on June 4th, tomorrow, proposing to build flood walls at entry points around its building. But if each building in the Federal Triangle gets walls, where's the floodwater to go? North to Pennsylvania Avenue? Is that a good idea? Third, the next stage of the Potomac Park Levee project, currently under review, is to raise by up to 4 feet the earthen berm that runs along the north side of the reflecting pool between the pool and Constitution Gardens, where the Vietnam Veterans Memorial is located. The environmental document for this $14 million levee, released in April, confirms, however, that stormwater flooding remains unaddressed and catastrophic flooding resulting from this could occur even with perfect performance of this project. The terrible truth is, even if all these projects and proposals are put in place at enormous cost and effort, the mall is left unprotected from stormwater flooding and remains totally vulnerable to another 2006 flooding event or worse. The National Mall Coalition believes the flood threat confronts all of us, citizens and government, with a challenge. Is piecemeal, jurisdiction-based planning the best we can do for our city, our capital, our landscape symbol of American democracy? Is adding more earth to the earthen dam, essentially applying 1930s thinking to a 2020 problem, the best we can do? If government entities, despite their best efforts, cannot come to agreement to protect against stormwater flooding, who can? The bigger question is, what's our master plan for confronting the existential flood threat to America's heritage on the mall? Here again, history provides some insight. Both historic plans for the mall were the work of private citizens thinking comprehensively about American democracy, founding ideals, and the welfare of the public. L'Enfant and the Macmillan Commission saw their task as a civic, patriotic duty. L'Enfant, charged by George Washington to design the new Capitol, described his goal directly on his 1791 plan. Washington at the time was little more than a collection of villages and farmland. He wrote, the mode of taking possession of and improving the whole district at first must lead to posterity a grand idea of the patriotic interest which promoted it. He envisioned a grand avenue, the mall. in which the Capitol, the White House, and public open space were integrated into one unified landscape symbol of the new American Republic. And he integrated them all with the future larger residential city. A century later, the Macmillan Commission, headed by architect Daniel Burnham, confronted a chaotic mall and an urgent need for new public buildings. Burnham said, "To love one's city and have a part in its advancement and improvement is the highest privilege and duty of a citizen." The kite-shaped plan restored and extended L'Enfant's symbolic cross-axis to the Lincoln Memorial and provided the Federal Triangle complex to house the growing United States government. For many years, the National Mall Coalition has advocated a new third century mall, an updated Macmillan-type master plan to bring order and vision to the future. Inspired by the citizens-based vision of L'Enfant and Macmillan, we've suggested expanding the boundaries of the mall, building on L'Enfant's first century mall and the Macmillan Commission's much larger second century mall, to potentially incorporate public lands along both sides of the Potomac and Anacostia rivers in order to accommodate modern needs. These include the inevitable future memorials and museums, and public events such as the National Book Festival and Solar Decathlon that have lost their place on today's mall. But that optimistic concept has little viability if we can't even protect what's already there. The urgency is real. Take a look at this 2018 Park Service report that projects the effects of sea level rise and storm surge on our national parks. Projections for a Category 3 hurricane in 2050 show almost the entirety of the mall covered by floodwater in blue, except for a 5-block section that just happens to include the site for the National Mall Underground. And then there's the financial cost of inaction. This FEMA flood insurance map, updated in 2016, is used to determine flood insurance needs and rates. The area dotted in red, which includes all the low-lying land along Constitution Avenue around the mall, is the area remaining after the 17th Street closure is constructed because of interior drainage flood risk. What will be the cost of insuring these unprotected buildings and facilities and the priceless national treasures within them? This is our call to action. None of us wants to see this again, or worse. In closing, keep in mind that it was a group of local citizens and the AIA who in 1900 saw an opportunity and helped lead the effort to bring into being the Macmillan Plan that set the stage for today's mall. At that time, the opportunity was to rethink the mall in celebration of the 100th anniversary of Congress's move to Washington, D.C. in 1800. Today, we have more than an opportunity. We have a civic duty in the face of existential flooding threats to put our civic action, to put our civic spirit into action. Thank you. Now that I've provided context to explain why we need the National Mall Underground, Arthur Moore will go into detail about how the design concept has evolved in response to feedback from DC and federal agencies and in collaboration with several creative and enthusiastic professional engineers.
Arthur, are you there? Hi. Go ahead, Arthur.
What?
Go ahead.
The first slide is not up yet. There it is. Very good. All right. Well, it's a very complicated project, so I thought it would be simple or better explained if it was in, shall we say, a simple format. This shows sort of 3 panels, green, blue, and white. And The bottom one, the white panel, would be where we would be taking in almost 330 million gallons of flood water. And that's the 200-year flood is projected at 24 million gallons. So we were actually having a little bit of a cushion. But anyway, that would be the primary function of this project. A second thing in the blue level is more complicated, and I will have to get into that, but it involves bus parking, visitor center, and some car parking as well. The upper green panel is shows how long this is, over 1,000 feet long. It's a unreinforced concrete box. No other way to put it, really. And the mall at the top is actually just not as thin as shown here. It's 4 feet deep, and because it has both irrigation and drainage systems in it, and so that is a big weight, and we'll have to take that into account. But anyway, this is a over 1,000 foot long concrete box. We have the next slide, please. Okay, I wanted to tell you how we would take the waters into the National Mall underground. We have at either end, you can see on the far left, is a cistern, which will be for groundwater, and it will be kept artificially low so that we can take if a storm comes and we really tremendous amount of rain is falling, we could take that floodwaters, those initial floodwaters, and put them into this cistern because it will have capacity. Meanwhile, we will be taking the buses out of this area, and we will be putting up intermediate flood walls shown here on the right. And then we can fill this area, the first area, with floodwaters up to 6 feet. And then it goes on from that, the same sort of sequence of things as we move the buses out and as we flood various sections. And once they're all flooded up to about 6 feet, then we can flood them all the way up to the ceiling. And so that is the process of loading the building with floodwaters. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, this is very good because it shows how we're dealing with two kind of vehicular approaches to the building. There is, and you can go out and see this, is an existing ramp down to the 12th Street Tunnel from Independence Avenue. We would use that ramp by, and then as it goes under, instead of going left, we would go right, and you would go into an underground lane, which then would blossom into 3 lanes. And the 3 lanes would have a sign at the end, which would tell us, almost like a Whole Foods cashier thing, would tell us which of the 8 garage intakes you would go to. So, and on the other side, the buses have to come into an area which not only they leave, download all their passengers, but they also need to be inspected because the buses have a tremendous amount of storage space, which could have some rather nasty things in it, like explosives. So we have to do that. We have to do that before we take them down to the next, to the level below. Now let's go to the next slide. Okay, I just wanted to see, you could see one of the things we're contemplating is a robotic garage. And here the robotic machinery is actually moving a car, but nobody's here. This is totally empty. And therefore it doesn't have to be heated or cooled or anything like that. It's a totally non-human, non-living space in there. But so everything is done automatically. Let's go to the next slide. Now here is, if you were driving down one of our entrance lanes, you could pull in, say you were designated to go to garage 5, you would be pulled in, you could pull into garage 5, and then you take your keys out of the car and you make certain that Fido or something else is not, something living is not still in there. And then you walk as a short walk to the Welcome Center. So what happens from then on is all automatic. The turntable turns the car around, so when you come back for it, it will be pointing in the right direction. As the red arrows go up, they show whether the computer has decided that the car should be parked on the upper level or in the blue on the lower level. So it's very simple from a user point of view. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, this is approximately where we are right now. To the left there, where it says cars, is the robotic car garage, producing a little over 600 cars parking. Then on the right side, you see buses, and this would be an initial loading area for the buses. They would be getting out where the cross hatches, cross squares are, because what we want to do is get everybody into the Welcome Center or the Visitor Center very easily. So they can come in from the cars on the left and come in from the buses on the right. And so that, and then the buses can, if the upper floor is totally filled, the buses can go down to the second level. And there will be almost 600 buses. And this is an amazing amount of storage of buses. Practically no other place can even make this be similar to this. And it also is in the right place. It's right where everyone wants to go to the museums and the memorials. Okay, let's have the next slide. Okay, this is, again, it shows where the buses are unloaded and screened. The Welcome Center, 2-level robotic garage. So this is three-dimensional, slightly three-dimensional projection of the idea of National Mall underground. Also shows where it is and related to the castle and the Freer Gallery and the A&I building. And let's have the next slide, please. Okay, the Visitor Center, we want it to be a little glamorous, shall I say. It'll have restrooms, security, first aid, food vending, and most important, information about all the things that are happening on the mall, on the in the various museums or at the memorials or whatever. So it's a very welcoming thing. Let's show the next slide, please. Next slide. Oh, yes, here we are. So we want to make it a, not a grand space, but at least something special, and where people can come and relax a little, get this information and the other services that are available here. Let's go to the next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, now this shows what it shows the entry pavilions. These are the lungs of the building. They are air shafts for exhaust and intake air, but they are wrapped around elevators and stairs so people can come and go at will. So it's if you want to go to the National Gallery, you would take this one. If you wanted to go that way to the African American Museum, you go that way. And if you wanted to go to some of the museums on the south, you would take the go to this one next to the castle. So it's I think it's a very it seems to be complex, but in very I think it is actually fairly simple. So I think that's it. I can now turn this over to Judy.
Okay, thank you, Arthur. Scott, do you take it?
Scott is going to ask some question and answer, do some Q&A now.
All right, we've got a lot of great questions in here. Thanks everyone for doing that. If you have any more questions, continue to put those in the chat box, and we'll go ahead and get started. How are we going to overcome security concerns with this project?
I can take that one. We of course thought of that from the very beginning, because here you are in a centrally located space. But the box itself is located under the grass panels. There is no structure above it, no museum, no building of any kind. And while we were working on this, we did consult with the Park Police, with the Capitol Police, with the Secret Service, and with Homeland Security. And they asked us questions, but there was no objection to the solution which Arthur has provided, which is do essentially what they do at the Ronald Reagan building on Pennsylvania Avenue, a federal building, which has underground parking under a functioning building, which is they screen the cars and buses. And so the plan here is to use screening, but if there were a problem, if someone made it through, ultimately there is no people, no building, no treasures above this structure.
Okay, we've got two questions. I'm going to put them together. You talked about the turf that was renovated. With this new project, what's going to happen to the grass work during the renovation of this project?
Arthur, do you want to take that?
We have to take up the existing grass. And it is a system, as I indicated before. It's 4 feet deep, and it has an irrigation and a drainage system in it. Part of our cost will be replacing that, exactly as per the National Park Service's specs, and it will be exactly similar to the other panels on the mall.
Okay, Judy, I think you might have answered this a little bit, but what are some of the Park Service's specific objections to the project?
Well, the Park Service completed, they worked for 4 years on their National Mall Plan, completed in 2010, and this was not, they did consider more parking for the mall, but ultimately decided against parking for the mall. Essentially what we understand is because their mall plan did not suggest adding any parking, that they therefore believe parking should not be part of the concept. So we understood that because from the very beginning, we met with the Park Service, understanding that this project, which originated after the completion of the National Mall Plan, was different. And we've met with them on a number of occasions. And we've tried to listen very carefully to the concerns about cars, which is why this will only be for mall visitors. And we've increased really quite a bit the bus parking, because we realize that even if people object to car parking, bus parking remains a crucial problem we can solve. And furthermore, thinking even further down the pike about the project, it could be reused, or it could be adapted in the future to have even more bus parking once we get to a point where maybe we have self-driving cars, and where the need for car parking is further reduced. So we're thinking about that. We're well aware of the issues, but the need for parking is there, especially bus parking, but also car parking for families, strollers, people in wheelchairs, people coming with large family groups, and so on. So we are well aware of the challenge here. But as we say, we've been working with everyone, being very open and transparent, and trying to adapt to what we're hearing.
I would like to add basically the parking is designed precisely for the people who are going to visit the memorials and the museums. And the way we control that is not have it available open. The garage will not be open until 10 or 10:30 in the morning, which will make it no use for any commuters. And it is really the rush hour commuting that is a problem for Washington, not somebody driving in from Annapolis, say, to go to see a show at the National Gallery.
And I would add also that right now the mall does have parking all along the surface. If we had this project, it could be that we could remove parking from the surface of the mall, and the barricades of cars and buses that now line up and down the streets, get them underground and open up the streets there for walking, for bicycling, for pickup with taxi or Uber, or even self-driving cars. So it would open up the streets of the mall in a way that we don't have right now. So it would be a way of getting cars off the street and solving a need, and maybe making the mall even more walkable, more pleasant without the cars on the surface.
All right, we're getting a lot of questions in here, so I might be asking some questions that you've already kind of answered a little bit, but so you'll sort of have to bear with me. If you can reiterate, Deborah Greenbush says, why keep okaying so many private cars? What about public transportation? So how has that been considered in this project?
Well, I mean, that is clearly the DC and the federal position in Washington, and we understand it, that we don't want to encourage more cars. Frankly, the car problem, as any of us know who drives in and out from the suburbs, is a commuter problem. People are coming into work and they're going home. So the worst traffic is between 6 and 9 and at 3 till 7 at night. This is aimed at the visitor. Right now, and we've heard from plenty of people, actually we heard from a lot of people on Capitol Hill who said that their constituents complain that they come to Washington, they have to stay in a hotel out in the suburbs, and taking a family of 6 on the metro is very expensive and very time consuming, and it can be a challenge. It's aimed at the families, at the people who want to visit the heritage. So we're not trying to make life easier for commuters. We're trying to make life easier for people who want to come to the mall. And I've heard from a lot of people in the suburbs, they won't go to the mall because there's nowhere to park, and they want to take the whole family down. So there are many sides to this, and we're trying to understand both the stated position of DC and federal agencies, which is really traffic gridlock, but also consider that Washington is tourism is an economic engine for the city. And we should the tourists really don't have a voice anywhere And we listen to them, and we're trying to listen and trying to make the tourist experience also better. And economically, that could be, benefit the city as well.
Okay, we have a question about coronavirus by L Notch. Has the coronavirus and possible future needs to social distance affected the visitor center plans?
Well, we're just going to have to see how these things play out. I mean, if this were to be built right now, it wouldn't be complete for 2 years. And we'll go through a lot of thinking about what kind of changes will be required. I mean, all the museums are coming up with the same issue. Does it mean that we're not going to allow that many people into the museums anymore? And is that, so this will obviously have to be part of the conversation as we think about it. But anyone who's been to the mall or talked to anybody who comes to the mall, either before or after the museums close, complains that there's nowhere to find a restroom. There's nowhere to find food. Even during the day, it's hard to find, you have to go into a museum to find a restroom. So these are fundamental needs. And yes, they can be adapted to the COVID, just like any other structure or any other public space. But right now, it's just too hard to tell. But there's no question that the need for the restrooms, the food service, and the bus parking. And also when we met with the bus association, they said, you know, the kids come in their school buses and they all have brown bag lunches and there's nowhere for them to eat. And so we considered that as well. It's a place with tables where the buses could arrive, the kids could sit down and eat, and then they can spend the rest of the day busy. So we've talked with a lot of people in developing this over these years, and we're well aware of some of the objections, but we think that we also have considered them seriously.
What does the geothermal system serve if most buildings are using GSA steam?
That's for you, Arthur.
All right. It depends entirely upon what system each of the buildings have and how adaptable they would be to a geothermal system. And I can kind of punt on this because we have a fine mechanical engineer, interface engineering, and he will deal with that issue so that it may be some cases it is too expensive to transfer over and use the geothermal well water. But I'm sure there are some cases in which, and certainly in the long view, switching over to a geothermal system, it's one of the few systems, mechanical systems, that actually pays for itself in a short time. So I think it would be prudent to have to do some early capital costs, but it would, in the end, probably save millions of dollars. And it is a sustainable and, you know, environmentally good system. So I think we'd have to look at it by each building, but I think it has such merit that many of them will adopt.
Well, and it wasn't even our idea. It was, we had an exhibit, a public exhibit downtown for a year, and we invited government people to come see the project and ask questions and so on. And it was there that Dan Tangerlini, who was then GSA administrator, came and said, look, GSA has to upgrade our buildings to clean energy by 2030 or something. And he said, and we keep getting out the Google Maps and looking for a large area unoccupied by buildings or streets. They keep looking for a large area where we could put in a huge geothermal field, and the mall is the only place there is. So could you put it in? Because we want to upgrade And this would be, so it was really the GSA administrator who proposed the idea, and we happily accepted it.
And I would like just to add, it is enormous benefit because it could have as much as 30,000 tons of cooling per hour. And that is an enormous benefit.
All right, I'm going to combine two other questions here. So how frequent will the entries and exits to this garage be? And how many buses can be inspected per hour?
We are going to have a traffic study, and I think we could almost say we can't answer that right now because the traffic study will do that. But we do know that 1,200 buses on an average day, 1,200 tour buses come into the city. So having 600 tour buses storage capability starts to really recognize that demand. Otherwise, they park all over the city and they run their engines all the time. And that is creating a major air pollution problem for the city, a lot of asthma in the young people. And it's a real problem people haven't recognized yet.
And I think also, I mean, we've been looking at other cities and how they do this. I think we can look at Amsterdam. There's also underground bus parking at the Vatican in Rome. There are other examples that we've looked at. And as Arthur said, the traffic study will be able to answer specific questions for this place. But there are successful places which we have visited, and they seem to work. They seem to be functioning, and they make the streets open, free, and with good clean air as well. So these are good questions, but we can't answer in any specifics right now.
All right, I'm going to combine two more here for you. In general, what is the timetable for this project? And then how many entities have given buy-in so far? And are you working with the American Bus Association or others who can help you analyze how tour buses and tour groups actually negotiate the mall, as well as who could help with lobbying efforts?
Well, from the beginning, I mean, we showed you a list of some of the groups we met with. But early on, we met with the American Bus Association. Actually, we've met with them twice for precisely that reason. First, to say, would you like to have bus parking under the mall? And they said, absolutely. And we'd like you to provide a place for the bus drivers to take a rest, get something to eat, because right now they have to sit in their buses on the street and then they have to keep the engine running. So we did meet with the bus groups, and oh, John, I just forgot the question.
Well, I think Destination DC and a lot of the other people who are in tourism, which is a major economic force in the city, have all been very helpful and welcoming this project.
And of course, the question is, who's the leader? Working with government agencies, they're very helpful, very important information that comes from it, but no one has the authority to say, yes, we're for it, or yes, let's do it. Ultimately, Congress is the only one with the authority over all these agencies and entities, and with the mall as a whole, which is, as a whole, belongs to the American people. So the leadership is really a question. Who can take the lead? And we believe that 100 years ago, it was the public, the local citizenry, as well as AIA, that saw a desperate need, saw fragmented management back then, saw a fragmented mall, saw that there were enormous needs that were not being met. And we believe, as a nonprofit, that the citizenry can rise to the occasion and try to bring people together.
All right, thanks for segueing there. I think we had a few questions about that, such as is there any support from Congress, and who has ultimate authority over this facility? So I think you answered that. Here's an interesting one. Have you taken into account the future of electrical vehicles and buses, at a minimum, stubbing in the additional electrical framework for this?
Yes, of course. We don't put everything into every drawing, but the idea here is this is a gigantic box. Right now we're planning for what the immediate needs are, but this gigantic box is so simple. It could be adapted in many, many ways to electric vehicles. Yes, we could put in charging stations, but there also may be other needs in the future that we can't even anticipate at the moment. And one civic leader suggested that, you know, maybe we need a shelter-in-place facility in the middle of the mall. Congress has one under the Capitol. Maybe the citizenry should have one where so many tourists and local citizens could go to, and it could be used that way. It also could be used during large public events like inaugurations or 4th of July for emergency vehicles. So the notion here is that we're not trying to design something specific to these specific needs so much as a structure that could be adaptable to future needs. And that's why when you look at Arthur's drawings, you see that they tend to evolve, and they evolve as changing needs happen. But it also allows for a lot of flexibility for this structure once it's built to be adapted to future needs.
All right, we're running out of time. I want to hit one or two more, and then we're going to collect all of these questions. There's quite a few of them, so we'll be able to provide those to Judy and Arthur for a follow-up. So here's a question. What can we do as citizens to support this plan? Should we write letters? And if so, to whom? Besides donations to the coalition, is there an existing fund to raise money for this?
Well, we are an all-volunteer nonprofit. We are 501c3, and we happily welcome donations, and we also happily welcome ideas. Ultimately, it is Congress that is going to make the decision about this, and we've met with quite a few members of Congress over the years, and so I do believe that going to local leadership, going to state leadership, contacting senators and representatives, telling them, I mean, this to us is such an urgent issue, the flooding. And to think that we are so many years, 14 years past that event, which is predicted to happen again and with greater intensity, that we can't come to a solution, but Congress can. And so we think, you know, getting to Congress, asking Congress to pay attention, ask them to meet with us, and essentially get a ball rolling so that Congress sees. And we've heard that what Congress wants to hear, and in recent years, Congress wants to see projects that are not simply standalone projects. They want creative projects that also maybe can be created using private monies. And that's why when we developed this, we made it multi-purpose. And one reason we wanted the cars as well is they bring in money because you pay fees, and buses as well. If Congress can see a creative multi-use facility that solves the existential flood threat, but also can bring in money, that Congress might get behind it. Maybe the committees in Congress that pay attention to clean energy and so on.
Also, I would like to say we have a financial group who have been studying this, and on a preliminary basis, they indicate that it all could be handled through various forms of bonds and other things, and that in fact the project could almost be paid for itself, almost, but it's very close. And so we have done some financial work on that, and we will be presenting that to people in Congress.
All right, I think we're going to have to leave it there. That was a great question to end on. Thank you so much, Judy Scott Feldman and Arthur Cotton Moore. This was a fantastic presentation. I know that we had a lot of questions at the end, so fear not. We're going to collect those questions. Like I said earlier, I'm going to pass those along to Judy and Arthur for some follow-up, and then we'll find a way to get that to everyone who attended tonight. So
Don,
thanks.
Could I
Go
just
ahead.
say something at the end
Yes.
here? I know you have a number of architects probably on the tuning in, and I would just like to say, as an architect, I've always yearned to do a building almost completely unseen. No pesky elevations and relatively little for the design review boards. That's it. It's an unseen building. Thank you.
Thank you
All right.
all.
All right, thanks again. So this concludes our presentation this evening. A recorded copy of today's presentation will be sent to everyone in the next few days, along with a follow-up survey and certificates for those seeking AIA CEUs. Thanks again for joining us, and take care, everyone.